Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Independent Intranet or SharePoint, what's the best intranet solution? I'm your host, Haydn Smith, Enterprise Account Director here at Interact, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today. I can already see lots of you have joined the event, so I'm looking forward to a fantastic event packed with expert insights, and I can't wait to jump into the exciting world of intranet software selection with you. So we're about to tackle one of the oldest and maybe hottest topics in our industry to help you choose the perfect intranet and digital workplace solution for your business. So get ready for an exploration of the classic SharePoint versus out-of-the-box intranet solution debate. It's going to be quite a ride. But first, let's go through a couple of essential housekeeping points. As I click my screen. Yeah, so first off, we're in the exciting big marker system today. So that gives us lots of opportunities to have a really interactive session where we can talk about this topic that's going to take up the next 45 or so minutes. I wanted to say that, yes, we are recording the session and you'll be able to get a copy to relive the experience afterwards. So we'll make sure we'll send that afterwards. And we're also aiming for maximum interaction for all our attendees today. So Big Marker's got some really cool features which will help us to make this happen. If you look over on the right-hand side, you'll see this Q&A tab. That's where you can submit your questions. Feel free to ask away. We've got an AMA, Ask Me Anything style Q&A today with our experts. It's going to be buzzing, so don't wait to submit your questions. Get them answered quickly, or you can also upvote other questions that you like the most to get those to the top of the list. I've got Daisy and Cedric who are on hand to answer your questions and make sure that we can give you the information you're looking for. In terms of who we are, let's just give you a quick introduction to Interact. We're a leading force in the independent intranet solution space. Our enterprise-grade software is revolutionizing business communication. It's supercharging employee engagement and boosting productivity. You can check out this slide. There's a lot of top-tier workplaces that trust Interact to keep their teams informed and connected. Some fantastic names there. That's just some that you'll have probably heard of. There's many, many hundreds more that you won't have. And we'll be able to introduce you to some of our customers today, or at least one of them. So why we're here today, let me share a bit of my journey with Interact. It's actually been 12 incredible years since I've been Interact, and I've witnessed some groundbreaking developments in the digital workplace technology space. Intranets have essentially evolved massively in that time, and they've had to, certainly in the last few years, just to keep up and adapt with our ever-changing work environment. But many people don't realize there's a whole world beyond Microsoft SharePoint when it comes to intranets. And as an enterprise account director, I've seen firsthand the need for an independent, out-of-the-box alternative to SharePoint. Why, you might ask? Well, let's just say there's no shortage of opinions when it comes to SharePoint and the tools within that particular suite of options. And when it comes to the choice that internal communication professionals and organizations have for their digital workplace, as well as productivity tools, this has never been more abundant or complex. Intranets are at the beating heart of the digital workplace, and then by the very nature need to integrate a myriad of applications and tools just to be able to streamline the employee experience and give your colleagues the tools, information, resources, and assets that they need to do their work. Intranets are no longer just a way to store documents. They're absolutely the key to our digital infrastructure and for getting the best value out of our other tools. I mean, I could go on, but let's just say that there's a lot to the digital workplace. But the real stars of the show today are the three people you can see on this screen here. So let's learn more about these people. Let's welcome our first panelist, Suzie Robinson. Suzie has a rich background in digital workplace strategy. Her expertise is unparalleled. Suzie, please share more about yourself and ClearBox.
Hello, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. So I've been in the world of intranets and internal communications for more years than I really want to think about now. And my background is primarily with frontline workers across different businesses, where I've been an internet manager and internal communicator for a number of years. I joined ClearBox Consulting around 2019, where we help different businesses of all different shapes and sizes with things like strategy, with product selection, but also things like content design. And I also look after a range of reports where we evaluate different products on the market, which includes SharePoint and Teams and the rest of the tools that are included in that, and Interact amongst others as well.
Thank you so much, Suzie. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to John Tauzin. John is a technology evangelist and a champion of user-friendly intranet solutions. John, we're really excited to hear more about yourself and your organization, Agora Consulting Group.
Yes, thanks, Haydn. It's a pleasure to be here. I am currently the COO of Agora Consulting Group, which is a boutique consulting company specializing in the evaluation and implementation of various intranet technologies. Myself and the founder of Agora Consulting Group have been in this space for approximately 14 years in various different capacities, working for various different niche players in the marketplace. In addition, I cut my teeth as a SharePoint admin architect working for a Fortune 500, where I deployed SharePoint across Americas, EMEA, and APAC, but glad to be here.
And we're glad to have you too. And last but by no means least, I'm delighted to introduce Jordan Gaal from Post Consumer Brands. Jordan, can you give us a quick introduction to yourself and tell us a bit about Post Consumer Brands?
Thank you, Haydn. My name's Jordan. I'm the corporate communications manager at Post Consumer Brands. Post is a global CPG, consumer packaged goods company, and we make everything from Fruity Pebbles to kibbles and bits. We're also a Frontline first company. We have 12 manufacturing facilities across North America, so we're always exploring communication solutions for that 75 to 80% of our workforce that isn't at their desk. Thank you.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you all. And I'm looking forward to learning from each of you during this webinar. Let's start with Jordan. Jordan, you've lived and breathed the independent intranet versus SharePoint decision. Quite recently as well, I think. You made a move that's transformed the digital workplace at Post Consumer Brands. We're all really keen to hear about your experience on the front lines, the challenges you faced, and some of the considerations behind your change from SharePoint to an independent intranet. Could you tell us a bit about your story?
Definitely. We made the plunge a couple years ago now, or about a year ago in 2022, and migrated from SharePoint to Interact for our intranet solution. But before I get into that, I just want to lead with, I'm a Microsoft advocate all the way, from Teams groups to Planner to the Copilot early adoption program. I would have loved to continue to use SharePoint if I could. I was really apprehensive about losing those Microsoft integrations and sort of the functionality that comes along with that, but it really just didn't meet our needs, especially when it came to longevity, resourcing, analytics, and accessibility for our frontline teams. To start, we were working with an aging intranet on a SharePoint Classic platform, built together with different custom templates and really reliant on a costly vendor relationship that we eventually ended. And that sort of left us in a spot where we didn't have an efficient way to grow our intranet with our limited team resources. Because like a lot of us on this call, we have a small communications team, and we just didn't have that bandwidth and technical skill set to continue to develop that intranet. So from there, we started looking at what are the requirements we need to grow and build this intranet. We partnered with our information technology team, our IT team, to evaluate both continuing with SharePoint, but also looking at an out-of-the-box solution. And as we continued to build that business case, we found that essentially busted a couple myths throughout the process that a native Microsoft option like SharePoint wasn't necessarily the least expensive option or the most obvious solution. It ended up costing 2 to 3 times less to go with an out-of-the-box solution like Interact. And the icing on the cake was just a dedicated support model and the different resources with branding. That helped us reduce that resource load on our team and roll out something that our employees are actually really excited to use and find more familiar to them. And something we've seen an increase in about 40% of engagement with our frontline users on the intranet. There's a host of resources that went into that, but that's really the gist of the story, and we're excited to see where it grows from here.
That is a fascinating story. There's so much we could talk about from what you've just described there. It's clear from your introduction that post-consumer brands has this significant frontline workforce. What was that? So one of the key decision criteria you went through. What's the sort of the driver behind meeting the needs of that audience?
Yeah, it was one of our key decisions, but it wasn't the key decision. You know, we know the majority user and the first user for an intranet platform is the corporate desk user. But it was important for us to find a solution that was also accessible and engaging for the frontline workers as well. When we looked at what kind of functional requirements we needed to meet to reach that frontline user, was a mobile friendly website or intranet, something that they could easily access on a device that wasn't a computer, something that was intuitive to use and familiar, and something where it would be able to grow with our workforce. We've grown probably about 65% in the past 3 years just through integrations. And as we continue to add on more employees, it's been helpful to have, it has sort of considered a future-proof solution where we don't necessarily have to rebuild it every time we're adding on 100 to 1,200 new users.
Now, I can't let the opportunity go to talk about the cost comparison that you made there. You said that Interact as a solution was significantly cheaper than SharePoint, which you often hear, in your own words, the myth that SharePoint is free. Could you tell us, what was the difference there? Was it around functionality? Was it around deployment? What was the big difference in cost?
Yeah, and this is one I always preface that it's going to depend a lot on your how your system is set up. My fellow presenters John and Suzie really have a lot of expertise in this area, but the way that we had our enterprise system set up is we would have needed to upgrade licensing to meet our functional requirements, which was really setting those functional requirements was key to building the business case for us. And the core requirements that I'm speaking to are primarily branding, analytics, and some of the mobile first intuitive interface that we were looking for that frontline engagement. And that was really the primary driver in the cost consideration, because we would have needed to, or we had explored upgrading our Microsoft licenses to include the full suite of Viva products in order to meet those requirements. And at the time, that cost was 3 times that of the Interact platform and the licensing structure for that. And really that sort of light bulb moment for all of us throughout the discovery process was sitting in a call with a representative from Microsoft and listening to a pitch for an intranet solution that integrated 4 or 5 different platforms across the Microsoft suite of products. And on our end, when we were going for simplification, it just wasn't the right solution for us at the time.
That's very interesting. Thank you. A lot to consider there. And anybody who's listening on the webinar, feel free to start submitting your questions and chat and to pick up on anything that Jordan said there that would be of particular interest to you. Jordan, thanks for that. I'm going to move over to John now. John, we heard some fascinating insights there from Jordan. Some about sort of the comparison of functionality, mobility analytics between an independent internet tool like Interact as well as to SharePoint. We also heard about the cost of equipping a frontline workforce with Microsoft licenses. So I'd be interested to get your feedback on the Microsoft suite. I'll come back to you in terms of cost, but when we talk about Microsoft and SharePoint, the conversation now moves more to wider topics like Viva. Could you give us some insight into what you're seeing in the marketplace around that?
I think I don't stand alone in my opinion that there is quite a bit of ambiguity in regards to what Microsoft Viva is offering, not only amongst myself, who's been in the industry for 14 years, but amongst Microsoft MVPs, right, who are out in the marketplace to deliver such said services, to be delivered at some time in the future as well, considering Microsoft Viva, was a marketplace disruptor back in 2021. I also definitely agree with Jordan in regards to, SharePoint tends to be or look free considering it's inclusive in your enterprise agreement, but there's a enormous functionality gap between SharePoint and the the niche intranet solutions that exist on the marketplace today. That is why, Microsoft is coming to the table with Viva and everything inclusive in Viva at various different price points, right? To take us probably to that next question, which is cost. Microsoft Viva is certainly not free. There are various levels in which someone must enter the marketplace. And therefore that brings individuals like Jordan to the table to shop around for a solution that brings a lot of functionality and features that they will, and this is key, that they will be able to simplistically implement and utilize.
And you mentioned MVPs there in terms of sort of the Microsoft ecosystem. MVPs being sort of experts in the forums and people who are advising customers how to get the most from SharePoint and the wider M365 ecosystem. That kind of support is critical, isn't it, in terms of getting the most out of any platform? In your experience, what should an organization consider when thinking about support from either SharePoint or from an independent vendor?
Yeah, I think you're going to find excellent support models with the independent vendors that exist, due to the fact that they have knowledge of their platform. They have a time to turn around support with penalties that will be assessed if in fact they do not. Microsoft MVPs and partners, gold partners, exist throughout the world in order to provide services and support on Microsoft technologies as well. However, they certainly come at a cost. So once again, as we talk about that cost, that often is, if we picture that iceberg, that's one of those costs that are unseen or hidden, which is SharePoint consultancy, or the cost of continuous improvement, or the unknown timelines of Microsoft's developments, which they continuously market as available as of today, but may not be fully built out for some time in the near future.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I fully agree with that. Thanks so much, John. Again, everybody on the webinar, if you've got any questions for John, you'd like to tap into his expertise, then feel free to submit those through the Q&A or the chat panel in your big marker interface. So let's move over to Suzie. Suzie, we've known each other for a long time, I guess. Going way back to when you were at the coalface, working for organizations that, if I'm right, a lot of the companies you were at had significant frontline workforces. And I know this is a passion of yours. Would you mind sharing with the listeners who might be in similar organizations with those sort of dispersed workforces, what they should consider when comparing independent intranets and SharePoint?
Yes, I've been around long enough that smartphones weren't a thing for frontline workforces. So technology has certainly caught up in the last few years to even be able to offer something where considerations are more now, should we allow people to use personal devices rather than whether the technology exists in the first place. And frontline workforces are a big deciding factor when it comes to choosing software. So for organizations that do have a big workforce that are frontline based, it is still very common in the way that Jordan mentioned to find that organizations still prioritize desk-based workers, but the frontline actually are where some of the biggest challenges come. particularly when you're thinking about whether to use the Microsoft suite or not. And I think something that's important to mention here actually is that just because you're thinking about whether to use SharePoint or not for an intranet or not, doesn't mean you can't also use other Microsoft tools for other things. So just because you choose not to use SharePoint for an intranet doesn't mean you couldn't also use Microsoft Teams for project management and that sort of thing. So I think there's a kind of an important distinction to make there. But just because something like Microsoft Teams exists with an app, it doesn't necessarily mean that is right for the frontline workforce. And it is something that Microsoft talks about a lot, and it is how they suggest the frontline needs are met, particularly in combination with Viva connections, which then brings things through from SharePoint. But actually in the work that we've done with looking at Teams, particularly from that kind of frontline first perspective, there are some quite big gaps in functionality, and it's still quite a chunky tool, and it's still quite an officey type tool for a group of people who are dealing with customers every day, or who are building something, creating something day in, day out, and have minutes to look at something, and so cannot use something maybe as complicated as Teams to have to look through and find a document about parental leave. And the SharePoint app isn't fantastic. It's not really what even Microsoft suggests people use as an intranet solution. And the Viva Connections app is there as well as another option for frontline and for mobile first. But again, it kind of lacks the control that some internal communicators in particular would want in order to be able to say, this is what matters to our people, so this is what we're going to try and present to people first.
Yes, thanks for that, Suzie. You're absolutely right to point out that the Microsoft offering is incredibly wide. And I think probably in the UK, in my experience, the vast majority of organizations are basing their tools, productivity suites on M365, and SharePoint is just a component of that, isn't it? Although it's a very popular one, and I'd be really interested to maybe give you the first tough question is kind of what advice do you have for an IC professional or a communications team that isn't sort of navigating this early evaluation of intranet platforms, where they might be being strongly sort of encouraged, shall we say, to adopt SharePoint?
Yeah. It is a common question, and I think that there is a difference in opinion in organisations between how suitable SharePoint is or not for organisations. The main thing that I think people need to consider is what Jordan's already mentioned, which is around organizational requirements. And there are a couple of different aspects to that are equally important to capture and use as evidence as to why a particular platform is or isn't suitable. And those are around broader organizational strategies. So what the organization is planning to do over the next 2, 3, 5 years, and how the different departments within that organization are also building towards that strategy in their own strategies that they have. And then alongside that is actually what different employee groups need. So the frontline is one that I've already mentioned, but there are lots of different employee groups with all sorts of different needs. There are things like cultural requirements. Maybe you want to try and encourage employee recognition across an organization. And there are certain things like that that you could build within SharePoint, or you could have within SharePoint or the broader Microsoft suite. But some other products offer it just straight out of the box. And so that question around building or buying is where that comes in, and the question around cost then comes in, because there's an ease of use that automatically comes from both an end user perspective, an admin perspective, and an implementation perspective of something that's already built. You don't have to scope it out. You don't have to run it through testing in-house or by using a partner that needs to make something happen. And actually that making something happen is something that I heard from a client relatively recently, which was that they wanted to just be able to do something in their intranet, whereas in SharePoint they had to make it do it. And I think that's the important consideration when you're thinking about what does our organization need, what do our employees need, and how can we do that? Is it going to have to be made to do it, or actually do we want an easier life, and do we want to have something that's out of the box, which may come from Microsoft or it might be from something else entirely?
Yeah, absolutely fantastic advice. Thank you, Suzie. Okay, we've had some good insights there from all of our guests. I just want to take this back to the audience. Let's remind you of how interactive this event can be. I can see some of you have found the poll, which I probably should have introduced to you earlier. So thanks for your questions there. In terms of giving you suggestions or ideas around what kind of questions you might want to ask our panel, Daisy has just shared with us some, I think, 10 potential ideas for questions. So I can see a couple of questions have already come through. We'll start going through those. But if you want to think about any of these particular topics, the panel are prepared and ready to answer questions around all of that. I'm particularly interested in AI. Jordan mentioned right at the outset that he's on some sort of beta track with Microsoft Copilot. I know that John and Suzie also have experience with this as well. So if you have questions about that, then fire away. So let's have a look at the chat. I saw a question earlier from Rebecca. Daisy, I seem to have lost that now. Oh, here we go. This is just me not getting through the panel. So there's actually quite a few questions, and I've lost Rebecca's. Let me find it just because I've mentioned it now. So Rebecca, let's have a look. To what level, you ask, does Interact integrate with SharePoint and Viva Insights? So this particular question is about one specific element of the Viva suite. Is there anybody on our panel who wants to take this particular question?
I can a little bit from my knowledge. So we're going through a review process at the moment with different products. So I've seen so many different reviews and demos recently. So I believe that Interact has quite an interesting integration with SharePoint in that you can surface documents that are saved in SharePoint even to those people who don't have SharePoint licenses within a kind of Interact wrapper. So if you want to use SharePoint for its amazing document management settings and metadata and all of that side of things, you need those controls around that, then actually then Interact can offer kind of a way to float that up. That's something that always stands out in my mind as being quite an interesting solution for that.
Yeah, I think we'll see more and more of this kind of interactive content exposure to colleagues. This is certainly something that Microsoft were talking about in their announcements this week. Let's have a look at some more questions here. I think the one that looks quite popular from Alex Yeomans, who asks, are there specific features that a SharePoint/Microsoft intranet doesn't offer out of the box that independent intranet tools do? Any thoughts on that, team? John, I think you might be well placed to answer this.
Sure, I think there are many. Some, there are so many features that modern intranets today provide. Some which are, or most which are out of the box, and some which are add-ons. Some important features are, as I mentioned before, which is just the creation of content in a simplistic fashion, and the ability to broadcast that content to multiple channels. So therefore, specific content creators within your organization, having access to create content and to share that content with a targeted audience based on and this answers another question within the panel as well, which is based on Azure Active Directory groups. So you can make use of the same Azure Active Directory groups to target users within your organization, as well as to not only target them via your intranet alone, but notifications are an enormous play within most niche intranet solutions. Therefore, enabling you to broadcast to Microsoft Teams, but also to create email notifications, to create in-app notifications, push notifications, and oftentimes SMS notifications. And then the ability, when I mentioned push notifications, you're broadcasting or creating content that can be consumed by your frontline workers within these mobile apps that are oftentimes available within most niche intranet solutions. You often come to the table with so many different features, such as also like must-read content. So content that a content creator is creating, and the content creator can also be a ghostwriter, writing on behalf of another user within the organization. That's a key feature. But must-reads can also lead to analytics. So therefore, having analytics on who has read this piece of content and how can we retarget the individuals that have not read this potentially very important piece of content.
I think there's a point to add as well, where the question it asked around SharePoint or Microsoft out-of-the-box features. Something that's associated with the cost is the variety of things that Microsoft talks about very, very openly, but is actually an add-on cost when you look into it. The cost of additional licenses for a particular module or elements of a module. They are announcing right now the fact that there is going to be a SharePoint premium, for example. Elements of the Viva suite, some of it is free, some of it's not, some of it's very expensive, some of it's actually very cheap. So whilst, yes, there are so many things the Microsoft Suite can offer, each bit comes at its own cost, and actually that's worth looking into when you're talking with colleagues about Viva Topics or Viva Amplify to be able to use communications features for around campaigns and things. Those things come at a cost, whereas other out-of-the-box products will just have it automatically, so it's worthwhile considering there too.
Yes, I didn't know about that. That's really interesting. And John, to your point about the must-read content, that sounds like a dream for HR and IT professionals as well as internal comms professionals too. I've asked a couple of questions from your set of questions here about functionality. Let's maybe move to something a little bit trickier. And I've got a question here for Jordan. Sorry, Jordan, but it's a brilliant question from Jerry Lynn, asking how was the change management moving your employees from what they know, i.e. SharePoint, to Interact? Was that a lot of sponsorship from executives or actually less of an impact than you thought?
That's a great question, because as communicators, we're also playing change leads too in smaller or mid-sized organizations, and that was definitely the case for us. There were a couple things that really helped influence and make successful change management for us. It was as challenging as any other change in your organization, but because of the amount of time we had spent exploring solutions with our executives and sponsors and looking at SharePoint versus Interact, and when we did eventually get that buy-in, they were all in. So that executive sponsorship for this new platform did play a huge part, and creating a purposeful cascade plan from those executives right down to the front line, and having a specific toolkit for the major levels of the organization. The other thing that I'd say was really the key in the change management for us was just how much easier it was, not only to get onto the platform, but once you got onto the platform to find what you need. So with an out-of-the-box solution, you can really put in the work up front to make a really, I often say, like a website or social media-like experience that your employees are going to be very familiar with. And if you get them in there the first time, they scan a QR code and they're able to find what they want to find in less than 30 seconds, then that's going to go a long way for future adoption and change management. And the third piece was not to forget your content owners and the people who are putting the content onto the site. Having an almost equal and separate change strategy for those folks as well, and making sure that they're not continuing to default to SharePoint to put new content or update policies and documents, but they're instead using and keeping that new intranet site alive. And all of these were things that we found easier to from a management standpoint with an out-of-the-box independent solution versus the SharePoint, Viva, et cetera suite of products that John and Suzie have spoken to.
Thanks, Jordan. Just looking through the questions here, there seems to be quite a lot aimed at you. I'm going to ask you one more, and then we'll go back to John and Suzie. Let me choose. Yeah, I like this question. This is a fantastic question from Louis Gold. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there. Louis asks, Jordan, what did the frontline non-desk workers find challenging about the SharePoint mobile offering that independent intranet helped with?
There's a couple key insights we found from doing some initial pre and then post survey with our frontline workers. And one of them was I think they had a screenshot of the apps up before of the SharePoint app versus the versus an Interactor independent solution app. And the mobile functionality, as I think all of us have mentioned so far, was key for those frontline workers. And a mobile experience that you can build, whether it's an independent app or just the website version of it, is much more user-friendly and accessible. So that was a huge piece for our frontline workers. They're interacting with a platform that's more familiar to them. We might know how to get around SharePoint as desk workers, but that's not the case with folks that's not always the case with folks that sit at a computer all day. So having something that was more familiar for them, and then also having everything in one place. What we found when our frontline workers were using SharePoint Mobile or other Microsoft mobile apps to access the intranet and resources, they were often having to download or go into other apps like Microsoft Teams, the M365 app, and that was a huge barrier for them that really drove a decreased adoption.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jordan. Let's go back to the questions. Keep them coming, if you will. I can see a couple here from Renee. Renee, let's ask your question to our panel of experts. Where do you see the ECA? So I think by ECA, you might be referring to Employee Communication App. Where do you see the ECA market going? Will intranet-packed solutions subsume the Employee Communication App market, or will that market split into Office and Frontline applications?
Good question. There are different products that do very different things, and they have a lot of the successful ones have a good customer base that appreciate the approaches that they've taken, which allows them then to develop their products in those directions that their existing customers are already kind of working within. So there are a variety of different approaches you can take to intranet. So you can have a lot of very kind of socially driven intranet solutions. You can have things that are very much more based around integrations with different tools like Google Workplace or SharePoint or something like SAP. And so there are much more kind of practical things. And then you have those things that are more employee app focused and are much more frontline focused and are built around that mobile experience first. And I think that those different kind of themes is what will continue, but what device they're on may be a bit more fluid. But those that do have that focus on the front line, I think will continue to focus on them, but have a mind to the fact that there are also desk-based people. And some of the products that we've reviewed recently have been those employee communication app products, those mobile-first products, but they have been promoting themselves as that's what they do. They acknowledge they are a channel that communicators manage. It's just one of the channels that reaches the front line well, that actually integrates well with whatever solution has been chosen for the desk-based people. So I think there's an aspect of control around how you want to talk to different groups and how you want them to access different things and have that flexibility that comes with kind of those decision makings around which bits of software you eventually choose.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think as we look forward to 2024, that there will be an increasing demand on multiple channels of communication to all the different segments and audiences within a workforce. And you talk about there using the information you've got to create those audiences. And I can see there's a question here from Terry, which I'm going to ask John to answer. This might be a bit more of a technical question, but John, Terry mentions we use SharePoint, which allows us to control our users' access to certain pages based on their Microsoft Azure Active Directory permissions. With your experience of the independent intranet service providers, John, how easy is it to control those tools, with this information that we've got from our user management systems?
Yeah, it's extremely easy. Most tools provide the means of creating groups and mapping those groups directly to your AAD permissioning model. And if those permissioning models are not managed within AAD in some other source, most intranet solutions provide the ability to sync users with multiple sources at once. So therefore, you could have individuals, identities that exist within Microsoft. You could have identities that exist within Google. You could have identities that exist within Okta, and all three of which are being brought into the ecosystem that is your niche intranet solution. And therefore, what you're doing is making use of those groups to not only target, to not only control access to pages, as mentioned in the question, but you're also and to govern your community, but you're also using that information to target specific audiences for readership of content. And not only the readership of content, but also this takes us to and answers another question where SharePoint tends to have a gap in analytical capability, but you're also then able to report on the analytics of that particular piece of content. You know, when was it written? Who was it shared with? Who consumed it? How long did they take to read it? You know, these are the analytics that become extremely important within these applications.
And there's actually been quite a few questions relating to analytics. So thanks for raising that. John, if I just stay with you briefly, Terry then asks about the impact of Copilot AI or similar tools when it comes to presenting information to users and respecting privacy and permissions of information. Is this something that you've come across in your work with intranet providers?
This raises a point that I somewhat missed earlier, which is what you're really, and I'll get to this, but what you're really evaluating within the purchase of an intranet is the CMS capability in comparison to your DMS capability. So CMS being your content management system, which SharePoint can provide, as well as with the additions of Microsoft Viva. It is quite ambiguous in terms of the product offering. You know, that's an absolute. And I believe much more clear in the evaluation of niche platforms on the market. However, you know, SharePoint does provide a very, as mentioned before, a very robust document management solution. However, in terms of accessing data that exists within SharePoint, that has to be orchestrated within your organization. So therefore, you're creating a content management system that has to work in tandem with your document management solution. You can either decide to migrate and store all content in your niche platform. However, most people don't. If they're on a SharePoint environment today, they want to make use of that document management solution with all the metadata that's available, with all the lists and libraries that exist within the ecosystem. So therefore, it requires some individuals internally to make sure that the access can be accessible from those virtual assistants or chatbots within your intranet.
Yeah, I agree. I think, first of all, the user doesn't want to have to choose between where they access their content. They just want to get it. And of course, Microsoft 365 has got those collaboration tools that within the likes of Word and Excel and PowerPoint that you want to make the most of. In my experience of being asked the question about independent intranets versus SharePoint, a lot of the decision used to come down to the associated complexity that people thought of with SharePoint and a somewhat challenging user experience. Is that reputation still warranted, or has Microsoft made serious improvements to the user experience?
I think it depends how much work an organization has done to it. I think SharePoint has endless potential if you have endless time and budget. And what you're thinking about when you're thinking whether to use SharePoint is whether you have the resources in your organization, whether that be actual people resource, time, and dedication. If you have dedicated SharePoint resources, brilliant. if you don't, if it falls as part of a standard IT team kind of general stuff they need to do, then you might struggle with maybe some of the degree of development that you want to happen on SharePoint, which is where there are different add-on products. So some of them will be as simple as allowing you to make SharePoint look a lot nicer, but everything else is the same. Some will work on top of SharePoint just to give you additional communications functionality. Or there are things like Intranet that are entirely independent and work without SharePoint at all. So there's a kind of a range of products that you can choose to implement within the organization. And what I would say is that there are the SharePoint add-ons that do then just fill some of the gaps that Microsoft leaves, and also stops you having to do some of that development yourself. But then there are independent intranet solutions that just are different. They just work separately from it. But there is nothing that SharePoint does that most independent intranet solutions can't do as well or even better in some cases. And so the integrations into SharePoint and other Microsoft tools are important. So bringing through chats from Teams, or having something like Viva Engage communities being used for some of the social elements. But most tools will be able to integrate with them because Microsoft allows you to bring through their suite into other systems. So there's a lot of concern that I'm kind of seeing in some of the questions that not using SharePoint means that somehow you're blocking those additional tools and features that are on offer through Microsoft, and that's just not the case at all. So it's worthwhile kind of just keeping that in mind, that actually it's looking at the requirements and seeing which ones will offer those things that you need to have in order to meet those requirements from your business.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we're going full circle back to meeting those requirements. Often, you need to start that consideration excluding the technology talk and just make sure that you're hitting the needs of your specific situation. So thinking about going full circle, let's circle back to Jordan. Jordan, I'd like to ask you the final question for today. And that's around, what advice would you give to any of the delightful attendees of today's webinar if they're in a similar situation where they're in that process of making a decision between the SharePoint system that the technology team prefer or the independent intranet, which might meet needs more closely?
Yeah, and that was the question we were facing a few years ago too, is asking others for the same advice. And I say first and foremost, just take a step back and look at the suite of tools you have right now, and look at what your true objectives and goals are as an organization. What are you prioritizing for communications? Is it getting more news out there, having employees engage more with your culture? Is it getting more eyes on policies and managing documents? Or is it a mix of all of the above? And starting with that, something that we've really hammered home is building out then a functional requirement list and a technical requirement list from that. And a second piece of advice is not to discount anything either. SharePoint might be, or some mix of Microsoft products might be, the right solution for your organization. But also to make sure you're looking at things as use case. Just because something can do something doesn't mean that it should. And that's the case that we found with SharePoint, and why we found an independent intranet solution to be better for us. And then third is that sometimes I've found it, at least where I've worked, is that feedback mechanism can be either overlooked or underutilized. So using what you know about your employees and what they want as proof points, as a way to sell in a business case, and then continuing once you've launched a platform, finding ways to measure year-over-year changes, continuing to survey and pulse survey small groups of employees, leverage existing tools you have to be able to do that. And that'll continue to justify the evolution of your intranet system and help you take that 4 or 5 year look out to see how can we build something now that we're going to be able to grow with in the future.
Superb advice. Thank you very much, Jordan. Also, thank you to John and to Suzie for your insights today. This is a conversation that we could literally talk about for the next few hours, but we need to draw it to a close. So if you'd like to hear more about Interact as a platform and what we can do to support your organization, then you can see there's a form down on the screen there. Feel free to fill that in and we'll contact you and have a conversation about your specific needs and how an intranet like Interact or even SharePoint could meet them better. As well as learning more about Interact, if you'd like to know more about what options are out there with ClearBox, they have an amazing, you probably already know it, but it's a fantastic in-depth buyer's guide to independent intranets and employee experience platforms. ClearBox has literally spent hundreds, nay, thousands of hours assessing some of the best intranet and employee experience platforms out there against their rigorous framework, and they've produced absolutely fascinating in-depth reviews of some of the leading independent intranet systems. So click the download button to learn more. And if you are looking for further impartial advice and assistance in choosing the right independent intranet software, then please check out John and his team at Agora Consulting Group's website. They've got services which include platform evaluation, strategic consultancy, implementation, deployment, loads more. You can download more information here from the pop-up that's just appeared. The team will drop you a line if you need any more information. So one last thing before we wrap up. If you're based in New York or quite happy to travel on a short plane ride there, then you might want to join us in person at an amazing event that we have for you, which Jordan will actually be speaking at. So for all those who didn't have your questions answered by Jordan, this is your chance to speak with him in person. So please request an invite to attend. The link is in the chat. So just a reminder again, this is an in-person event in New York. The sessions from that event won't be recorded, but we have recorded this event and we'll make sure that we'll send that to you after the call. So with that, all that's left to say is thank you for all of you, for all your input, for your questions and your votes and your polls. I hope it was an interesting session for you. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll have a look at them and see if we can do a bit of a roundup following this. Otherwise, you've got all these socials in front of you, so you can contact us via LinkedIn, obviously via our website, as well as through Twitter/X at Intranet Experts. So thanks to every single one of you, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye now.